This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Rosa, and for this episode, I invited poet and writer Noi Lelek to come on and share her story of what has helped her overcome a history of sexual trauma, suicidal ideation, and we talk a lot about poetry and how she was able to find that voice within her, to that part within her to help her heal. She wrote a book titled All My Favorite Men Are Dead, and she came on to talk about her creative process and how gratitude and connecting with her inner child has amplified her healing journey. She was so generous with the information that she shares, and I know that it's going to be very helpful for so many of you. If you find this episode helpful and healing on your journey, please subscribe to the podcast, share with a friend, share it on your social media, and tag me so I can reshare with my audience. And I want to give a brief disclaimer that this episode is not meant to treat or diagnose any mental health or physical health condition. This episode does not substitute for healthcare or mental health services, and guests are entitled to share their opinion and perspective, and this does not constitute an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. So without further ado, here's my interview with Noi Lelek. Take a listen. Hi, welcome, Noi, to the Inner Healing Paths podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, of course. And thank you so much for understanding. I know we've been trying to get this going for a bit and there was some hiccups along the way, but thank you so much for being patient, understanding.
Yeah, no. Oh my gosh, life happens. I understand that completely.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Yeah, so what kind of like led me to reaching out to you and finding your podcast, which is so beautiful. I'm always
Oh, thank
grateful
you.
for people like you who are just putting out so much healing
Mm.
into the world and just like making it such an accessible resource. It's so necessary. So
Oh, thank you, Kate. Thank
yeah.
you.
But yeah, so my journey that led me to this moment today, I dealt with a lot of childhood trauma and then sexual trauma, and I found poetry as a way of healing through that. And the more, like, the deeper I go on this journey, the more I see how deeply impacted people who have experienced trauma are by having a creative outlet, whether that ends up being poetry or art or cooking, just anything creative. And it's such a beautiful way of just like making sense of life and healing from things. So yeah, my specific outlet is poetry, and I love it, and I don't know how I would live without it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you mentioned the creative outlet as a healing source, for so many people that have experienced trauma. How did you tap into that creativity? How did you make that connection that this is actually a outlet, a source for my healing? How did that happen for you?
I wish it had been like a more intentional path that I could
Mm-hmm.
direct people to, but I'm not even kidding when I say I'm like, I didn't find poetry, poetry found me.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
I studied English literature in college, graduated with my degree in literature, and I hated poetry classes. Like I never understood them, didn't get the point of them. I just like went through the motions. I always wanted to like write a novel or yeah, write short stories. And I had just such a dry spell after college because I was just pushing down all the trauma I'd experienced, just repressing, pretending everything was okay. And then after my third suicide attempt, I was up late, like 2 nights later, and I couldn't get to sleep, pulled out my phone, opened up my notes app, thought I was gonna, journal or write a story or something. And I just let the words come and I wrote my first poem, which is actually included in my very first published book of poetry titled All My Favorite Men Are Dead.
Yeah.
And I have written a poem almost every day ever since.
Mm. Oh, so beautiful. And Nui, I didn't know that it was you had such an experience and how it led you to poetry. I mean, that is in and of itself a very, very traumatic journey post the trauma, right? It just that process of healing sounds like it was a very intense process for you.
Yeah, it was very intense and very, yeah, it really did just come
Mm,
to me out of nowhere. Like I had
yeah.
maybe I'd written a few poems here and there like as a kid and stuff, but it just came so naturally. And then ever
Mm,
since it's just been just this constant support. Like if poetry was a person, I'm like, it would just be like my best
mm.
friend, like always
Oh,
there for me when I need it, ready to
yeah.
listen, give advice.
That's so beautiful. And, going back to you mentioned the suicide and, I know so many listeners, especially some people with, with trauma and just difficulty. Sometimes, that is these are the thoughts that come up. When how did poetry help you cope specifically with the suicidal thoughts? What did you notice as you found poetry or this outlet for you? What happened with the suicidal thoughts or those tendencies?
So I definitely never ever want to speak to anybody else's experience.
Mm, yeah.
Everyone's journey on this earth is so unique and so individual. But
Mm,
at least with my
yeah.
experience with it, I was going through the motions of life as if everything was okay.
Mm,
And I constantly wanted to die. And I like attempted to take my own life several
mm,
times and
yeah.
just go back to life and be like, well, I didn't. So like pretend like
Mm,
pushing it down, pushing it, like pretending like it wasn't a big deal, pretending like I was okay.
mhm,
And
yeah.
it just was not the case. And I think poetry, more than anything, gave me an outlet of finally facing up to what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like seeing those words, it like really hit me of like,
Mm,
oh, this is how I feel. This is what I'm experiencing.
mm.
Not okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds like there was this part within you, this poet part that came through for you at this very difficult point in your life. And it's almost, and I could see you mentioned it as your best friend. It's almost like the poet part of you just came through and it's like, we're gonna help you. We're gonna
Yeah.
help you get through this. Yeah, so beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's the message of creativity and pain and trauma. It resonates with so many people. And one of the ways that I like to see creativity is it comes from that place of it's where your higher your higher self is where your our truest sense of self or who we are at our core, that it's through our creativity that we're able to access that. So when we're connecting with our creativity, what we've been through and all of that is almost it's not the priority when we're connecting to our creativity, because our creativity just flows through, right? And it shows us who we really are. So I think it's so beautiful that you were able to connect with that right at that time where you needed it the most.
Yeah, it was so powerful. It held up a mirror to me and forced
Mm,
me to see that I wasn't okay. Like I wanted to pretend like I was, but I
mhm,
so clearly wasn't. It was just the mirror that I
mm. Yeah, and pretending that you were okay, that's also, very I think a lot of folks do that. There's a concept that that I've read about and people talk about. It's called bypassing, or some people do spiritual bypassing, or even information bypassing, but that sense of, that the action, sorry, of suppressing what we need to work through emotionally by engaging in other things, that keep us numb.
Yeah.
What would you say what was that you were using to suppress? Was it, for some folks, it could be anything. It could be even working out, or friendships, relationships, right? Traveling. A lot of times folks gravitate towards certain things as a way to suppress, but what we suppress, just persists, and eventually it needs to come out. So what was it for you? What was it that helped you to keep suppressing the trauma?
It was definitely travel. It was
Mm,
absolutely I fell in love with the ability to completely run away and be around
mm,
people who didn't know me, didn't know anything about me, and it kept giving me like a clean slate to pretend I was okay. And
mm,
anytime it would start to rear its ugly head of very obviously this girl is not okay, like I just go to the next country. I did it. I've been
oh,
to about 56 countries.
wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. So,
I mean,
and this happened in a period of how long? In a period of how many months or years?
I traveled to most of those 56 countries in a period of about 3 years, but I
Oh,
started
wow.
traveling almost immediately after I was raped in college. Like
Mm,
months later, I'd left the country and I just kept going after that.
mm,
Like obviously I would have to come back to do university classes, but
mm-hmm,
every chance I got, I just escaped. I'm like, let me not
mm,
face what's actually happening. Let me go to another country, post
mm,
pictures that make it seem like my life is so great and everything's well, and nobody will question that I'm not doing okay.
wow. Yeah, I mean, yeah, traveling is such a joy in and of itself for so many people, but it sounds like at some point you were able to make that connection, that although it was there was there's a rush, as going from country to country, and then maybe something happened in between countries that led you to believe, okay, the rush is subsiding, let me go to another one. What was it that helped you make that link, instead of just going through the motions of traveling from country to country? What helped you make or connect those dots, that hey, I'm actually suppressing or bypassing?
I really was poetry, and it wasn't so right away.
Mm,
I realized like I started writing, and I don't think I realized that I had been using travel to suppress all my trauma until about a year after I started writing. And then it was like months after I'd stopped traveling to come home
got it.
during the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. So during your traveling, you were just going from one country to the next, but the connection came afterwards, once you were in one place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Because then I started to realize if like staying, I mean, the pandemic really came at such I want
mm,
to say this with the preface of like I don't think the
yeah.
pandemic was a good thing. Like I don't think like
Yeah.
I'm glad it happened, but it's like for me it was such a forced stillness that became
Ah,
such a powerful force for transformation in my life, in my life.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sounds like through poetry you had to process, what you were sitting with, and unable to really go anywhere else. You had to really process it, and it just came out through your poetry.
Yeah. And I was so lucky that when I did come back home to the States during the pandemic, I met a woman very quickly who is also an amazing poet. She hasn't shared her poetry with anybody but me yet. I keep trying to get her to because she's just fabulous. And
Mm,
having her to like send poetry back and forth to, and having that like support, and like somebody who also uses the same creative medium to work through their own just their own life experiences was really beautiful, really powerful.
yeah, absolutely. So, let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about your book. And in the title, All My Favorite Men Are Dead, is such, when I read the title, I was like, wow, this looks very interesting. And it wasn't what I was expecting. It was so it was, the poem's so emotional, so raw, so how can I say it? Just very, it just gives you a very clear, vivid imagery of
Yeah,
what it feels to go through the pain that you went through, especially in relationships and in your relationship with others, specifically with some men, but it's not all about that.
yeah.
Yeah, so can you share a little bit about your book, your poetry in that book, and just if you can also share a poem if you want, if you
Yeah.
feel comfortable. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, no
But
worries.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about your book.
So it's so interesting because the title, people have
Hmm.
such a visceral, like
Yeah.
in body reaction when they hear it most of the time. And it's so interesting for me, the differences I get between, a lot of women who hear it, they'll either laugh, they'll think it's funny, or it will deeply resonate with them where they're like,
Mm,
yeah. I know whatever it is you're describing, the pain you're experiencing that led you to say that or write that down, I get it. And with men, it's usually very immediately offensive, immediately puts them on the defensive of like, what are you trying to say? Like, you
mm,
think all men should be dead. You want to live like on an island of just women, like very intense. And it's what's so funny to me is the title of the book actually came from a therapy session I had when I realized I needed help on this healing journey. And my therapist asked me if
mm,
there were any men in my life I could trust.
mm,
And I really had to stop and think about that question because I had kept myself at arm's length from men for so long. And
mm,
I didn't even have any men in my family because I have a very interesting family dynamic. So there weren't like really men in my life that I felt I could trust. And then I really like sat on the answer and started thinking about it. And it finally hit me. And it was every single book I had on my shelf. It was like most of the books, Shakespeare and Dickens and Alexander Dumas and Shel Silverstein. And it was all these men who like I
mm,
I lived inside of the worlds that they created, like their souls, their hearts, everything
mm,
in them poured out into these books. And I was like, those are my favorite men. Those are the men that I trust. They're my
mm.
favorite. and,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
hit me. I was like, I have so much trust for men who are no longer alive because it's like I can get everything I want from that connection, all the intimacy, the shared experience of this like human life and all of that without any fear that they'll take advantage of me or one day,
Mm,
use what I've said against them or abuse me or
yeah.
so it comes from this place. It's not even a very angry place. It comes from
Hmm.
mostly a very like just like a sad realization.
Absolutely. And one of the things that is unique about your book is that it has an empty page. So every other page is empty, and it's for us, for the readers to write, to draw whatever comes through after reading your poem, and it's a way to process. So I found that so beautiful. How, what where did the idea for that come from?
I was working with my graphic designer who is an amazing man, a really good friend
Hmm.
of mine. And he could tell how much love I had for this book and how much of my soul and myself that I poured into it. And I was thinking, I was like, I want the people who read this book to have this much love for it. And it made me realize I was like, I don't necessarily love this because it's like just, a book of poetry or a book of poetry that I resonate with. I love it because it's emblematic of all of my pain and everything I've worked through and just being able to like even if there's still things in there where it's like I am in the process of working through, like I've gotten to the point where I can face it enough that I wrote it
Mm,
down. And I'm like, and I want to create that space for other women to do that for themselves. Like they may see themselves in my
hmm.
words, but it's so much more healing for them to then take that and use that to put it in their own words or in their own, paintings or sketchings or
Mm,
drawings to make
yeah,
that their own.
yeah, absolutely. And when it comes so you mentioned that the medium for your art is through writing. I do you have you found any other ways of coping with the trauma or the pain or is it primarily writing poetry?
It's writing, but then also I definitely have a very interesting trauma bonded codependent relationship with my motorcycle. I think I'm very aware of
Yeah.
the fact that I latch onto that coming from a place, especially like as a woman who's experienced rape, that feeling of powerlessness that you experience after something like that. And the way I
Mm,
feel when I'm on the motorcycle is just so powerful, so untouchable. So it's all of like the feelings that I feel like were taken away from me after, several of my traumatic experiences. So
yeah.
I use writing and then writing,
Writing. Mm.
RIT.
Yeah, no, it's so tell us a little bit about where you are at in your relationship with men. You know, I know you mentioned that you at some point during your therapy and healing journey, you realize, well, my favorite men, the men that I trust and I feel safe with, they're all writers, they're all dead. Where how has that evolved for you since then? And what shifts have you noticed?
Yeah, so I that's what I love about the poetry and is I feel so blessed is that once I am able to put it into words, I'm able to face it and then start to work through it and say, okay, what kind of life do I want for myself? And are these beliefs and are these thoughts and are these
Mm,
ways of thinking going to give me that life? And not to say that there is a right or a wrong way. I definitely don't want to invalidate any woman's anger who may want to hold on to that.
absolutely.
If anger fuels you and it gives you the life that you want for yourself, absolutely keep that. It's
Mm,
it's doing something, it's serving you.
yeah.
But for me, I was able to work through it and what's so beautiful is I'm doing something that haven't seen really in poetry is this is actually
Mhm.
the first book in a trilogy. So
Mm,
it's an entire series regarding my relationship with men and my experience with
mm,
sexual trauma and yeah, it kind of goes through the different phases of that I've been experiencing. And so the next one that'll be coming out is a healing book of questioning, and then after that I have a healing book of rediscovery, because this one is subtitled a healing book of pain.
mm,
I really feel like my relationships with men have healed so much in so many beautiful ways that would be hard to put into words except for through poetry probably.
mhm, yeah,
But yeah, no, I'm in a really good place right now, which is just amazing when I look at where I came from and how much pain I
mm,
was experiencing so constantly.
yeah, and one of the things that is coming to mind now as I hear you speak, I think so many people can relate to the anger and the sense of just feeling so powerless, especially after trauma, but just, so much of what happens in just in the world, right? One of the things that we've noticed is that so many of the crimes and the horrible things that we see, the majority are committed by men. Not all, right? Not all crimes, but a lot of the mass shootings and a lot of just the horrible things that we see, or even rape and trauma is not only men, of course, but majority of the perpetrators are. And so I think even if you have not experienced, in your own life, we know of someone that has, right? Another woman, another person in our lives that has experienced this, or we see it, right? We see it on the media, and so I think so many people can relate to that sense of not feeling safe. Now, when you've been the victim of a terrible crime like what you went through, I think it's even more, visceral, right? And that sense of safety and then the anger that comes as you're healing, I think is so appropriate. And it's one of the things that really stood out as I was reading some of your poems, is that anger is so palpable, and I think so many women are especially as you're navigating the trauma, so many of us get stuck in feeling the numbed and then also frozen.
Yeah.
that the anger is actually an indicator that we're healing. If we can get in touch with that emotion, we're actually healing. We're actually moving through because we're feeling it. We're feeling something other than numbness, other than shock. So I think what one of the things that stood out about your book is that it helps it, for those that are not yet able to express their anger, your words, because it's so it just comes through, the anger, the harshness, and some of the words that, and I don't say harshness in a bad way, I just say harshness because they're very raw, statements, and it makes it easier to connect with the anger that we should feel when we've been betrayed and taken advantage of and used and hurt, and that we should feel anger,
Yeah.
right? So connecting to that emotion is so healing and so cathartic.
And it's
And
so, oh,
no, go ahead.
I know it's so interesting to me that you brought up, like, like it does seem to be, typically men who are committing these crimes, and especially in regards to like anger around that. I actually had a therapy session almost a year ago when I was like working through and getting through some things, and I remember just like almost shouting at my poor therapist.
Mm,
But I was like, she understood it wasn't about her,
mhm,
but I was like, I get that it's not all men, but why is it always men? And I was so angry and I was so frustrated. I'm like
mm,
over here trying to work through the wounds I have to create
yeah.
relationships with men. And I'm like, fine, it's not all of them, but God dang it, if it's not always them, it
Mm,
seems, it seems.
absolutely.
And it's like there is anger that comes with that of like,
Yeah, yeah. And anger, rage, that's, I feel like more women, uh more of us need to be connected with these, because these are powerful emotions, right? Powerful emotions that tend to come with an action, that tend to come with they're almost like catalyst emotions, because they push us towards something, towards being able to either stand up for ourselves, to fight back, to connect with other parts of our journey that we need to move forward. So anger, rage, these are, when channeled, appropriately, and when channeled for our highest purpose and good, I think that it can just be so powerful. And sometimes we need others to model that for us, especially when we're healing. And so through writing, through poetry, through even movies, right? We're able to see powerful women express their anger, their rage, and channeled, most importantly, express and channel in ways that are healing, that can be healing and powerful for others and for ourselves.
absolutely, absolutely. And it is really empowering.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And what are some other your poems, did you have any other writers that were inspiring for you, and in terms of other strong women writers that you felt you were able to identify with these really strong emotions?
Yeah, I mean, I actually met a woman when I was living in Bali who really helped bring out more of the poetry in me, and like in a more intentional way than I had been before I started attending her workshops. And
Mm,
she's amazing. She deals with a very similar subject matter in
mm,
poetry, definitely sexual assault. She published a book of poetry called Loose Girls, and
mm,
her name is Henley Worthen, and
mm,
just absolutely amazing, so raw,
mm,
so unfiltered. She just lays it all out. You can tell this is a woman who has reached a point in her healing journey where there is nothing but self-love and confidence. She recognizes that this pain is not
mm,
her cross to bear. She did not choose it. It all of the blame lays at the feet of the men who took advantage of her.
mm,
And it was so healing to read that book, and it was so beautiful, and I cannot recommend her book of poetry enough to women who have
mm.
experienced sexual assault, because she is such a powerful writer.
Yeah, no, thank you for that
Yeah.
resource. And I'm definitely going to check it out. And so, when it comes to to just your own journey. You mentioned doing therapy, and of course, your poetry. And I think so many people, I guess some people feel like it's just one thing that is going to be helpful, and but it sounds, at the core of my podcast is to show all the different paths that lead to healing. So for you, it was definitely poetry. You mentioned your therapist. Did you do, or have you done anything else that you felt has really contributed also to your healing, to specifically from your sexual trauma?
I love doing sound meditations. I absolutely love I
Mm,
try to do breath work, meditation, but even more so than all these paths, I think what has helped lead me to all of these very healing activities that do a lot for my mental and emotional health
mhm,
is just finally understanding that self-love is not just a buzzword. It's not just a catchphrase. It's like it's an act that needs to be practiced every moment of every day. Anytime you catch yourself being cruel or critical to yourself in your mind, you need to just like be able, like, bring the awareness to it so that way self-love can actually emerge. Because if you're not even aware that you're being so critical and shaming and harsh to yourself, you're not going to be able to step in and be like, whoa, 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 stop it. This is not very kind. I need to show myself love and compassion and kindness in the moment, the same way I expect my friends to show me love and compassion and kindness. And I think like bringing awareness to the moments when I'm being cruel and instead stepping in to show myself love has been such a huge part of my healing journey, because showing myself love brings me to the paths, brings me to the activities that are going to help me heal most.
mm. Yeah, and what are some of the actual, concrete things that you do that that show that you use to show yourself love? What are some of the things that you are able to shift to when you're noticing, okay, I'm not being very loving and compassionate towards myself?
Yeah, so a lot of my critical, like harshest, inner voices come from childhood, especially like
Hmm.
with a wound with my mom.
Yeah.
And so I've always been like kind of afraid to be a mom because I was so worried that I was going to treat my daughter the way that I was treated. And I realized that I absolutely will treat whatever child I
Mm,
have the way I was treated if I continue to treat myself like that.
mm,
So I started talking to myself as if I was my little daughter in my head, and like telling
yeah.
myself good night. And like when I wake up in the morning, be like, good morning, sweet girl. Like, how are you? Like, how did you sleep? Like, as if I was my own daughter. It's like literally almost like getting practice of like, I don't want to hurt another human being. So it's like, let me practice on me. Cause if it comes natural to me, that it's going to make me a better mom. And I recognize that there are so many wounds that women have around like, oh, I'm only, I'm not a woman if I'm not a mom or whatever. And recognizing like, for some people, this might not be the right path of approaching yourself this way, and like doing this for like a child that technically doesn't exist. For me, this is very healing, because the thought of like I've always wanted to be a mom, but then the fear of being a mother like my mother really kept me from walking down any path that would lead me toward motherhood for so long.
Absolutely. Yeah. And first, that was such a beautiful approach to bringing in more of that love, that self-love and that compassion. And I do a lot of inner child healing in my own practice. So, it just reminded me of the practice of inner child work. It's not necessarily doing, a meditation once a week, even though that's helpful, right? It's about living that and connecting with your inner child every day. And you just gave us a beautiful example of how to do that, is to acknowledge your inner, that little girl within, right? That inner child within you that is there. And you mentioned, for you is, to be to in the hopes of being a mom in the future, this is practice for you to be loving and gentle to a little one in your life in the
Yeah.
future. Yes, it's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really good tool, I think, that so many folks can use.
Yeah, I think people should not be afraid to refer to themselves like with
Mm,
baby names, like sweet baby girl. Like when I'm talking to
absolutely.
myself in my head, I call myself sweet baby girl because sometimes I need to
Mm,
remind myself that there was a little kid in here once and she was hurt a lot and I just want to
mm.
always like love her.
Yeah, absolutely. You get to reparent. That part that's the beautiful part about healing is that even if you did not receive what you needed while you were growing up, once we're able to connect with that and acknowledge that, and we're able to reparent our that part within us because that part is still there, right? The little you is still very much there within you, and it needs that love, it needs that attention, that acknowledgement.
Yes.
So that is a very beautiful practice that you do. And you mentioned also the your it sounds like now it's a practice. You do this very naturally. How did it become a habit? Because I think so many folks, they read about doing, the self-compassion and the inner child work, and it's hard. You read it cognitively and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I want to do it. And then maybe you do it for a bit, and then you just, life gets happens and routine kicks in. How or what helped you make this part of your day-to-day routine to stay mindful on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So what actually really started it was so interesting is I've had a few experiences this year where I felt very just like let down and disappointed by my mother and her unwillingness to sort of like recognize my like value in her life and to treat me as if I was somebody who mattered to her. And I just started thinking, like, I genuinely, it came from such a place of like starting to thinking about one day, like my little girl, and like knowing I'm not a perfect person, knowing I'm going to fail, but that I want her to know no matter what, she is so loved. And I started writing letters to, this daughter that does not
Mm,
exist, of just like,
yeah.
already just like apologizing for all the ways I failed her, just saying like, but I hope she always knew that I was there for her, that I'm in her corner. And after about 3 letters, it hit me that I was saying all the things I wanted to hear.
Mm,
And oh my God, I'm gonna start crying.
yeah.
I broke down crying when I
Yeah.
realized that. And I was like, as beautiful as it would be to give that
Mm,
to somebody else, this little girl who doesn't exist yet, the fact that I was so ready to go my whole life without giving it
mm,
to myself, but just wanting to give it to her kind of like hurt even more of like, why do you believe you're not worthy of that? You're so
mm,
capable of giving it to, like, clearly you're capable of giving this. You're
mm.
writing letters to somebody who doesn't exist.
Yeah,
You've got
yeah.
it in you. So why don't you just give it to you?
Absolutely. Oh no, that's so beautiful. And absolutely, I feel that, but through that process, you were able to acknowledge that there is a part of you that is healing through this, whether it's the future, your lineage, or whether it's backwards, healing yourself. But there's an element that happens, and I just find it so magical that when we start healing ourselves, we directly and indirectly healed our past, also lineage, are those that came before us and those that came after, that will come after. So it's such a beautiful journey. It sounds like for you, as you were connecting with your lineage, those that will come after you, you were able to tap into that healing that you very much still need now.
Yeah. So it led me, and that led me to a lot of practices that I think are really
Mm,
beautiful that I keep on a daily basis, where like every day I write myself a 1-page letter in my journal as
mm,
if I was like, I'm like, sweet baby girl, I hope you have a great day. Like all these like really nice things.
mm,
And I have a forgiveness journal where I write down one thing I forgive myself for every day. So I'm not holding on to any shame or regret
mm.
or guilt. And so, yeah, but it really started as like wanting to show love to somebody else led me to finally understanding how I needed to love myself and
Mm,
why I needed to give that love to myself.
I love that. So beautiful. I do that. I did that when I was pregnant. I started writing letters to my future child, and
Oh,
I actually forgot. It's so funny, I forgot that I did that at some point, and recently I found a letter that I wrote. So, so my experience, now is like I found the letter that I wrote to my baby, that, and now that I know her, knows for her personality and everything, it was for me reading that and now having her, and 3 years later, it's such a beautiful experience. So save those letters, because you just never know how they're going to help you integrate. So for me, it was like, I connected certain dots, and that was unexpected.
Yeah.
Meaning with the letters, before I had her and now that I have her, and seeing those letters, it was a very powerful experience to connect certain dots that I would not, maybe not have otherwise. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah, so save all of that. And then you mentioned that the writing to your future self is also, it's interesting because I was a yoga teacher a few years ago. So I did the yoga training, and part of our training, there's this yogic practice, a very ancient practice. It's called a Bhavana. And Bhavana practice in the yoga tradition basically is writing to your future self, and is actually a tool for manifestation. And it's so ancient, and when you were describing that, that's what came to mind, is you're writing these Bhavanas, and what you're putting in there, which is healing and nurturing, it will be for you, and it will also be for, those that come after you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely feel that. I feel that more and more every day. And it's so beautiful. And gosh, I just want everybody to
Mm,
I just want to bring everyone on this journey of like, if you're struggling and you're like
mm,
dealing with like low self-worth, low self-esteem, like you were not received the love that you deserved in childhood. I'm like, oh my gosh, please just come on this journey with me, because it's
yeah.
not easy, and it's not like every day is beautiful and wonderful, but
Mm,
it's so much better than not doing it. It's so much better than not facing it and realizing this is why the hurt exists. This is why
absolutely.
my
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and you mentioned it's not easy, and I think that's one of the things that we really, with social media, and what we see out there, is that it's all, healing, and it's all pleasant, and you feel better, but the truth is that sometimes it can be very triggering. Work connecting, or even writing the letters that you described, can also be very triggering, right? But I think it's important to be able to sit with that discomfort, to
yeah,
be able to notice that discomfort, and to continue, if you're able to continue and get support. You don't have to do this journey on your own. You
yeah.
don't have to do this self-help only route, and I can do this, but there's people out there that, it doesn't have to be a therapist, but there's people out there that want and offer services specifically to help you heal.
Yes, exactly. And honestly, I would highly recommend people not go it alone, because there's
Mm,
so much more power in community and in opening yourself up. I feel like society today has such a wound around self-reliance, where it's like we need
mm,
prove that we can do things on our own, and we have this
absolutely.
desire to and it's like there is so much healing in support, in allowing yourself to just fall into the support and the guidance and the help of somebody worthy of that trust.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There is nothing wrong with getting help. Actually, we are supposed to be this is naturally, we're not supposed to be alone on
Yeah,
any journey, whether it's healing, parenting, career, whatever it may be. We're meant to do it with the support and the help of others, with a village, right? A tribe.
100%.
Yeah. And I heard you on another podcast, and you mentioned another beautiful practice, and I was wondering if you can share with our listeners about that. It was practice of forgiving yourself every day.
Yeah, so that's my forgiveness journal. Yeah.
Yeah, so can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
Like,
I realized from
yeah.
my childhood wounds that I held a lot of shame, a lot of self-blame, and like that's where a lot of my low self-esteem and self-hatred at times even came from, was blaming myself for everything that ever went wrong and every moment where I felt uncomfortable. And it's like always finding some way to make it my fault. And so when I started writing down everything, I can't even tell you. I don't remember where I got this idea from. I don't know if it was genuinely like, oh, I heard it and this is somebody else's idea, or if I just decided out of nowhere.
Mm,
It's been so long now, I don't even remember. It's the ugliest looking journal. It's just brown. I got it at like
mm,
the dollar store, just wrote down on the cover, I forgive myself for dot dot dot. And then I write down at least one thing every day. And I was blown away by the things that came
mm.
out at first. Like
Yeah.
the things that came out from like deep that I'd been holding in for years. We're talking like I'm 29 and I wrote down, I had to forgive myself for some things that happened in high school. Like I didn't even
Mm.
realize I was still holding that against myself.
Yeah, no, it's a powerful practice. When I heard that on the podcast, the few days after that, I did it. I designated a specific notebook, and I'm gonna do this. And the first day I wrote, I don't know, it was like 10 things. But just like you said, I was blown away about what was coming out. And same thing, I'm almost 40, and some of the things that were coming up were things from like 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's
And I
crazy.
I was like, "What is this?" I had not thought about these things in, I don't know, 10, 20, I don't know how many years, right? And then I noticed the second day it was, I think I did it for like 5 or 6 days. The second days it's so basically little by little it started getting to more the day to day, more the recent the recent things, right? But it's
Yeah.
interesting. For me, it was just really fascinating to observe that process within myself, that how these really old things were coming through. And I'm like, I didn't even know I was feeling guilty about that after 20 years.
And it's so you did it for a few days. So I've been doing it for a few months.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see the ebbs and flows of what you were talking about,
Mm,
where at first it's like, oh, you're pulling from this deep, deep well. And then eventually it goes
yeah.
the day to day of like, oh, I forgive myself for this yesterday and this, etc.
Yeah.
And then every now and then I would have a day where I would go to sit down and write, and I'd be like, I have nothing to forgive myself for. I'm doing my best. And that's
Mm,
all I can ask of myself. And the next day would not be the case.
yeah.
The next day I would write down things I wanted to forgive myself for. But every now and then that day would come, and it would be so interesting to see of like,
Mhm.
and I had no way of predicting. And every now and then, like, but going back and seeing in this forgiveness journal,
Mm,
it's like I've been doing this for months and seeing that I've had like 5 days where I 100% sat in
mm,
the truth that I was doing my best. I
mm.
am not at fault or to blame for anything. I'm like, if I keep doing this, maybe one day I'll have like a whole month where I feel that way. And then
Oh.
maybe like when I'm like 75, I'm like, I'll like have like 6 months where I feel
Mm.
like I don't have to forgive myself for anything. I'm doing my best, and I know I'm doing my best.
Yes, I know, I love that. I saw it like a, almost like a purging
Yeah.
the at the beginning. So it was a really, really interesting and powerful practice for me. So I encourage the listeners to try it. Now that we're talking, I think I'm gonna do it again for the next few days. You know how it is. You start something new and then you do it for for a few days, and then
Yeah.
something happens that you forget, and then you forget again, and then so that's I was really enjoying doing that. And then yeah, and one day I probably got busy and forgot, but now that we're talking, this is a reminder to go back to it, because it is, I experienced it as very powerful and so interesting. So
Yeah.
definitely go out and do it, see what comes out for you.
But no one, I really
Yeah,
stand in the belief that no one should ever shame themselves for falling off the wagon of something that they know is
absolutely.
good for them. It's like the worst thing you can do is shame yourself for not being consistent with anything that you want.
Yeah.
One day is better than 0 days. One time is
Yeah.
better than no times.
Yeah, and sometimes, we really outgrow certain things, right? And we don't need to do it again. And I listened to someone talk about supplements one day, and they were talking about how the question was, well, so how do you know when you no longer need to take this supplement? And it was an interesting response, because basically it was, well, sometimes our intuition, we don't get like a distinct indication, like, okay, you need to stop now. But sometimes we start forgetting,
Mhm.
and then it's like a day and we forget, and then we get back on it, but then it becomes 2 days, and then it's 3 days, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm feeling better. Do I really need, so it's almost like there's a part within you that helps you through that. uh Not always, right? But I've found with certain practice is important to also give, like you said, give ourselves a lot of grace. Maybe we don't need it. Maybe this is something that we needed to do it at that period of time, and then we can move on to something else. Or, if for me, with this conversation, for me, it's like, that was really helpful. I'm going to go back to it, because sometimes we do need it. Maybe there's more things that I need to purge. So
Yeah, yeah.
my intuition is telling me we need to go back to that. That was really helpful. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All
Uh,
about giving yourself grace, showing yourself love, doing what you feel is right for you.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a lovely conversation, and I was wondering if you have a poem that you want to share with us to end our chat today.
Yeah, I would love to. So some of my poems are longer, but a few of them are shorter. And this is a shorter one, but I love it and I feel like it's really impactful and it's
Mm,
how I feel about sisterhood and
mm,
how we really do share in this collective experience, even though all of our unique individual journeys are so different. We do share in like a similar share experience. And
absolutely. We have more in common than not.
yes,
That's
absolutely.
yeah, the humanity, we just have more in common. We're more alike than what we realize. Absolutely.
So this one is called I Know That Girl. I know that girl, her pain is my own, but not mine alone. It's shared by all the women who have suffered and been struck down by the stones sinful men throw.
Oh,
So
I love that.
thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. So powerful. And I want to encourage everyone to get your book and use it, make it, I wrote in my own stuff after reading some of your poems, and it was just also very, very powerful. So, and I can't wait for your next two books.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
love hearing that you like wrote down your
I
own.
did. Yeah, not for not every
Yeah.
poem, but some poems just really resonated with me, and yeah, things came through and I'm like, okay, well, let's do this. There's a blank page here for me. So, yeah, it was beautiful. So
I
I
love
thank
that.
you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so beautiful, Rosa.
Yes. No, thank you for your time, for sharing your journey, your story with us, and I look forward to having you again, maybe for your next book.
Oh,
You can
absolutely.
come read.
And I'm going to be listening to your podcast,
Oh, yes.
like the rest of it. So
Oh,
absolutely, I would love to come back on again. I love your episodes.
thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosachettilcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.